Welcome, everybody. I see some people are still entering the virtual room. I'm thankful that you're all here tonight for our Community Forum number 3. These forums are essential to the process, and the surveys that follow are essential to the process. But before we get going, let's do a little bit of housekeeping just to make sure we all understand how the evening's going to function. So we're hoping to inform everybody that the meeting is going to be recorded and it is going to be available on the website. And that was a really powerful thing last time. Not everyone was able to make the time of the forum, but we had a very high level of participation afterward, watching the video and then taking the survey. And so those of you that can't be here tonight, rest assured you'll have an opportunity to watch it and then provide some feedback. We also are going to make sure that everyone is muted until it's time to talk about it, so we don't have a lot of feedback and difficulty for people to hear us. And the chat feature is an excellent way for you to communicate with us. If you want to put some thoughts into the chat as we're talking, and then there will be numerous times during the meeting that we pause and address the chat and we talk about what it is that you're hoping to get answered tonight. Your feedback is crucial. So please utilize all those functions, both on the YouTube chat and the Zoom chat. I think we're ready to also then go to the agenda, give you a sense of what the evening's going to hold. The first thing we're going to talk about tonight is community feedback throughout the process, mostly about survey number 2, which was really helpful. We're going to provide some education tonight on the difference between a grade center philosophy and the K-5 instructional model that we're in now, so everybody understands the differences between them. We're going to talk about bond funds and what they can be used for and what they can't. We're going to show you some scenarios, some sketches, and talk about each scenario and pros and cons for all of them. We're going to ask some discussion questions. We're going to hope for some feedback throughout the process. And we're going to talk about next steps. We're going to talk about what's coming up next in the process. So before we get into the feedback, in which I'll turn over to Chloe in a second, I want to talk a little bit about how important that is. The feedback last time, for example, highlighted the fact that some people are concerned about COVID. And it came up a few times in the survey that people were curious about why we would be having a discussion about the future and bond issues when we're in the middle of a pandemic. And it was a pretty good question that we wanted to make sure that we addressed. So the reason I think it's important to talk about that is because we're talking about the future vision of the district. That's a 25 to 30-year vision. And COVID, we all think and hope is going to be a temporary time in our lives. And so we can't stop thinking about what might be the best way to educate our children moving forward. And we got some excellent news this week about a potential vaccine that might bring an end to the pandemic at some point in the near future. So I just wanted to address that straight on in the beginning about why we would still be having a conversation about the future. I think we owe it to you. We owe it to our kids to never stop thinking about how we can be better and what the educational future holds. And so what I'll do at this point is turn it over to Chloe to talk about some specific feedback from the survey number 2. And again, feel free to enter some questions in the chat, and we'll take a pause after going through the survey to see if there's any questions. So Chloe, we'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe Beagley-Ludicky. I work for Tower Pinkster, the architecture firm that's working with Chris and Company and amazing staff at APS to figure out where we're going to go with these bond projects. So thank you to everyone that took this survey. I'm just going to really quickly review some of the results. This is an abbreviated version of the full survey, but we will make sure that all of the results are available online. So to kick it off, the second survey had 291 responses. Just for context, the first survey had 310, so a few less than the first time, but we did see an increase in the community members that responded, which is great. The responses were supportive of the biggest needs addressed in the facility assessment, which we see on the slide here. Some of these needs seem small, but they certainly add up to make a big difference in the district. The programmatic issues listed at the high school were identified through the facility assessment and conversations that we had with different staff and teachers. Over 65% of the responses were supportive of these updates. The updates identified at the middle school focus on programmatic improvements that really create or add academic spaces. Over 75% of the responses were in support of these projects. We've been exploring the possibility of combining the elementary schools into one grade center, which is what Mr. Antoine will speak on a little bit later. But at the time of this survey, over 50% of the respondents said that they would support this idea. And 28% said that they would need some more information, which is what we're hoping to cover tonight. So please do feel free to put comments in the chat. We definitely want to dig into this tonight. Should we forego the idea of a single grade center, the majority of the updates proposed for the existing elementary schools are focused on providing additional academic and support spaces for each building. Over 75% of the responses were in support of these projects. The facility assessment and conversations that we had with different APS staff and community members revealed 6 major arts and academic upgrades that people felt were necessary. But we see a little bit less support in these areas than in the academic building. Still over 60% of respondents said that they supported these projects. There were some common themes in the responses to the additional projects or upgrades that should be considered question, which included expanding the Wi-Fi reach, securing the buildings and playgrounds, bringing in natural light to classrooms, updating the furnishes and furnishings, alleviating some of the pickup and drop-off tensions that we see at the different buildings, and incorporating energy efficient and sustainable design elements. These have all been considered and are part in the scenarios that we'll talk through tonight. In this second survey, we asked respondents to review the scenarios that we presented at the last community forum and select the scenario that they preferred. The scenario with the most support was scenario 4, followed by scenario 2. We will review more detail about those scenarios this evening and then send a similar survey with the same question. 81% of respondents felt like this is a time to do something with the district, or that we do need a bond issue to improve the district because the work cannot be done through the district operational budget. People do have concerns about being able to tell what is necessary for the district given the current COVID situation, which is what Mr. Antoine just touched on. But again, if you have questions or thoughts on that, please put them in the chat. And then finally, nearly 70% of respondents felt like the needs of the district do warrant a bond proposal, knowing that it will not increase the tax rate in the district. This is a super positive result. We can see the APS pride shining through. It makes us really excited to continue to have these conversations and work with you all. I will turn it over to Ms. Chrisman to talk about bond funding unless there are any questions on the survey.
So just to touch a little bit on what is allowable on a bond issue. I know there's always some misinformation about there that it could be used on operational costs and that. So when we as a district go to the voters for a bond approval, we are asking for fairly specific things. So some of the allowable uses are school facilities. So that might look like a remodel. It could be additions. It could be improvements to athletics, the arts, technology, real estate purchases, if that's listed in the bond language, buses. So those are all of the types of things that are allowable that typically will be presented to voters. Some of the restrictions, just as I mentioned, is voted debt cannot be used for salaries. It can't be used for general maintenance type issues. It can't be used for operational related items. Districts are restricted to spend bond funds based on voter ballot language. What this means is when we go to the voters and ask for approval of a bond issue, there's going to be it's not going to be you're not going to see every little item. We're going to be estate purchases. So vote on this issue, you will know what you're voting on. And then the other thing is that districts, there is a maximum of a 30-year ask. So meaning we can only ask for something we can pay for within 30 years. So if we want to flip to the next slide, this kind of shows kind of the why now. So this is currently Allegan Public Schools, and historically for many, many years has levied a 7.55 mils. What this does is it generates enough funds every year to pay our principal and interest payments on existing voted approved debt. If you look on the left side of this graphic, you'll see where the yellow line begins to dive down. So in about 2 years, our existing voted 7.55 mils, we will no longer need to levy that amount of mils to pay for the existing approved voter debt, bond debt. So legally, we can only issue every year. We revisit this every year. We are only allowed to levy the amount of mils necessary to pay the current year principal and interest payments. So as you see, in about 2 years, without any additional bonding, that 7.55 mils that we in Allegan have historically had for many years will begin to drop down into the 2 to 3 mil range, and then it quickly drops off. Well, I say quickly, but within 20 years. So what we would be asking is the voters to approve what we call a no mill increase. So it would leave us at that 7.55 mils. And with our given property values and estimated property values for the school district, we would potentially be, or not potentially, we are projected to be able to levy as much as $83.75 million that we would then be allowed to go to the voters and ask for approval to continue the 7.55 mils to do some of the projects that we're going to talk a little bit more about here in the next slides.
So maybe before we get into some educating about the differences between some educational philosophies, I want to highlight what Amy just said, which was essentially this opportunity, this financial opportunity will not come again. So again, we try to revisit the why now. And I think that's an important thing to make sure we emphasize about why we're here today. Another thing I want to emphasize is that this project is different. This bond system is different than we've done in the past. So in the past, and I think this was great, there were needs that were very well known, whether it be an auditorium or the pool or technology. And the district asked the voters to approve those things. And those also were different because they were around 18 or $19 million bonds. This proposal would be significantly greater and could therefore have a significantly greater impact on our district as a whole. And I think that's why we continue to come to you with surveys and forums to help us focus on what we're hoping for. So Rob, do you think it might be an appropriate time to pause? I want to just make sure that I haven't missed anything that would have popped up in the chat, both related to the survey or related to the financial information that Amy just presented.
Nothing in the chat yet, so
okay.
I will keep you posted.
Okay, thank you very much. So the next thing that we would like to do is a little bit of educating on a couple different philosophies of education for elementary students. The bonds in the past have focused a lot on some of the other buildings, the high school and the middle school, essentially with the field house and the conference center at the high school, for example. And what we did find in the survey is that that was noticed by the public. It was noticed that it was time to put a focus on our elementaries, which is what we're going to talk about today. Not to say that some excellent things wouldn't happen at the other buildings as well, which they would. And so right now we're in a K-5 structure, and that allows us to have neighborhood schools and spread some things out. So that's our current state. Our philosophy is we spread the grade level over multiple buildings in the district. And a grade center philosophy means that all of the students within a grade level are together. Oftentimes, this leads to a district having an upper elementary and a lower elementary. For example, a K2 building and a 3-5 building. So that's a big difference in educational philosophy that I want to get into today and talk about why that's important to know. And so I kind of want to tell a story about how this impacts us and the decisions that we make as a district. Some things that might be a bit behind the scenes that maybe the public would not always know about. So it's not unusual for us to have an average class size, let's just say third graders in the district of 155 students. And so we're constantly asking the question of how many teachers do we need to serve that? So we do some math. We say if we had 7 teachers, the class sizes would be a little over 22. And if we had 6 teachers, the class sizes would be almost 26. And so that's sort of a conversation we have about what's best for kids and what's fiscally responsible for us. So moving forward, in just a perfect world, based on the size of our current buildings, those 155 students are distributed in the way you see on the screen. 65 at Pine, 45 at West, and 45 at Dawson. That would allow us to have 3 sections of that grade level at Pine at almost 22 students, 2 sections at Westward of 22 to 23, and same at Dawson. Pine's our biggest building, so we would want the majority of the students to be there. And so that would allow us to have 7 total teachers, have very reasonable class sizes, and that would be a great day. But unfortunately, it doesn't always work out that way. And I'd like to go over a couple scenarios that we run into in the past that might be different. So let's just say hypothetically, we have a bunch of third graders at Westward that year. So let's say they have the 65 and Pine Trails and Dawson have 45. So then we have to think about that. Well, what do? The number 65 can't be divided by 2. That would make class sizes of 32.5 students, which is not appropriate. If we divide it by 3, that feels a lot better at 22. But then we run into a problem. We have the right amount of teachers, but we don't have enough classrooms at Westward to make that happen. We'd have 12 rooms for classes, a specials room, and a resource room. That equals 14, which would max out Westward. If we added a third section of any grade level on that math, we don't have enough space. And then we have to figure out what to do about that. So that's certainly a possibility that we've run into some trouble about imbalance in that. And then we could have an additional scenario that those 155 students are distributed even differently. So let's say you have only 32 of them at West. Well, you could divide it by 2 and have 16. That's a pretty good class size. You could have 1 at 32 kids, but that's too big. And then you get into a situation where you have to do a division and make 3 sections at Dawson and 3 at Pine, based upon the fact that if you did 2, those class sizes would be too large. So what that scenario puts us into is 8 teachers when we really only need 7 and maybe even 6. And so sometimes just the distribution of students makes us sort of have to make a decision that wouldn't be considered the financially responsible one. So those are just some scenarios about why spreading students out the way that we do right now is a challenge sometimes. So if we go to some additional benefits of grade centers that might be good to talk about tonight, One of them, we talked about balancing class sizes. That's great. Fiscally responsible, we talked about that a little bit already. If you think about it, if all the third grade teachers are together, there's options. There's 6 to 8 teachers of that grade level instead of 1 or 2. That could be something that parents look at favorably. Kids could all grow up together. Relationships are built, grow up together playing sports and music and having activities. Being the middle school principal for a long time, I know it was quite the stressor when kids all came to the middle school and maybe didn't know some kids from the other schools. And I actually saw that those friendship groups that were established in elementary kind of stayed there through middle school. So the North Ward kids would hang out with the North Ward kids, the West with the West, and so on. And I think there's the potential for more and stronger friendships to be built, which would be awesome. An amazing benefit is that all the teachers in the grade level would be together. That's collaboration for the betterment of kids. That's sharing resources and ideas for kids. So that's a huge benefit. Right now we have specials teachers, ancillary staff, like occupational therapists, speech therapists. All of these people have to travel throughout the district. And I think we could provide more efficient service if that travel did not need to occur. Educational equity is huge. We want every kid in the district to get the same opportunities. I'll give you an example, is some of our schools have been engaged in a Hill Grant process, which provided them some additional funding. And some of our schools were not, because they didn't qualify for that grant based upon the demographics of that particular part of our district. And so we had some students getting something and other students not getting something. And that doesn't always feel very good about equity. And we have dealt with the tribalism, the West is best mantra. And there's some other ones I know some of you may know about having people feel like schools in our district are not equitable in terms of maybe neighborhoods and finance, and that some might be better than others. And the philosophy of we are all Tigers, and to build that school pride and culture right from kindergarten, or I think is really something that would be very powerful and amazing for our district. And if we could move to the next slide, there are some benefits of K-5s as well. Neighborhood schools have been a powerful thing. Some relationships in united neighborhoods are a good thing. Walking distance for some, although not as many kids walk as they once did to school, but that is a benefit. Having a relationship with one principal, for their whole career, instead of maybe 2 if they shifted, could be considered a benefit. And the geography of having schools in various locations in our district, one on the north side, one on the east, and one centrally located, I think could be perceived as a benefit as well. And so what we need from the community is to be educated on this topic, and then at some point provide some feedback to us. Because as you will see when we get into the scenarios, this is an important pivot point to the decision moving forward. Are we going to change our educational philosophy that might be something that I think would be pretty powerful? Are we going to stick with K-5 neighborhood schools and revamp those to be better and be able to provide a better service to our kids? This is the discussion that we need to have today, and we need to have moving forward to get to the right question for our community. So is this me as well, Kalina? Rob, have you noticed anything in the chat yet that we should pause so that I don't move too quickly?
Nothing yet.
Okay, well, that sounds good. I'll keep going. So we have some goals. The reason we're here today is because we do have aging infrastructure. We have safety needs and security needs for our kids. It is time to invest in elementary education. As we stated earlier, those buildings have not been significantly addressed in other recent bond issues. We need to think of the long-term future for the district. And I want to touch on a minute the powerful work that's been going on in our city, in our area. The downtown area is just getting revitalized, and it's great energy down there. I also want to just compliment the riverfront, and back when we're able to gather again, how much fun and what a great place it is to gather by the river and listen to music. And we want to be a part of that momentum as a district. We want to together revitalize this town that would increase property values and draw people here. And this is an opportunity that we have that we have not had in a very long time. But we need input from you. And so that's why we're here tonight. I think I did see something pop into the chat. Is that right, Rob?
That is correct. So a question, where would the K5 building be located?
Yep, that's a really good question. We want to be sure that the community is leaning and supportive of something like that before we get too deep into searching. It would be on a new site. I've been, pretty open that there's some property at Pine Trails that we own that we might want to take a look at. There's some pros and cons to that based on the site. There's some property, behind the middle school that's intriguing, that would be close to our other facilities for efficiency. So there's some options out there in our community that we just haven't explored to the depth that we will if we find out that this is indeed the direction that the community is hoping that we go. It can be very exciting. So we want to make sure you're with us before we get too deep into that. So our facilities assessment that was done over the summer, projected a list of needs, upwards of $100 million, which to me, when I first saw it, seemed a bit intimidating. But after talking to the team from Chrisman and Tower, that's not unusual. You're always going to have needs that might surpass your abilities. And what you do is you prioritize those needs and you focus the bond proposal around those prioritizations. And so we did the assessment. We've studied the buildings. We've met with stakeholders in the community and in each building. We've done these forums and surveys to try to get feedback from you. We've prioritized, and then we need to do more of that this evening and moving forward. And then we come up with a plan, and we want it to be a plan that the community and school employees and everybody can support. And it has all the elements, and we're not done with that prioritization process. And so this is an important time that we're together today because we're still trying to get as much as we can into the program that would be exciting to all of you. Okay, so what we want to do next is go through a description of each of the scenarios that we've brought forth. As a reminder, back in Community Forum 2, there was a scenario number 1. And the purpose of that scenario was just to provide a baseline of if we really didn't do anything at all except address facility assessment needs, no structural changes, that provided a baseline. We know from the feedback that the community and we and everybody always wanted and definitely is clear that wants more than that. So what we're going to go over today is scenarios 2, 3, and 4 and provide some feedback on those. And there's some differences, a little bit of financial differences and some things that some have that others don't. And I think we're going to go through them. But if I recall, I think we're going to allow some of our teammates to chime in and go through that with the community tonight. So I'll turn it over. Was it to Jacob?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, James.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah, so I see a few questions popped up there as James was talking, and a couple of those were in the theme of what I'm about ready to go through. So If you can humor me, I'll go through these three scenarios. On kind of a high level, I want to point out to you the significant differences between each of these three. And then Sean Partial is going to help as well following this by going through some blocking diagrams and show you how these would be situated on the sites and how we may add to, change, renovate, and otherwise revamp the sites in line with each of these scenarios. So scenario number 2, at the top of your screen, you'll see that we highlighted the first bullet point, and in each of these we highlighted the first bullet point, and that's because of a point James made that it's come out in the community forums leading up to this point that it is time to focus on the elementaries. So you'll see that the overarching theme in these scenarios is elementary renovations and additions, and kind of reinventing the approach educationally to the elementary grade levels. But that doesn't mean that we're ignoring the other facilities within the district. So with scenario 2, the approach here is to use the existing building stock. So Dawson, Pine Trails, and West Ward, and try to work into each of those 3 buildings the elements that the community has asked for and faculty has asked for as educational needs and some shortcomings within those facilities. So that would consist of additions to the buildings, new gymnasium, new cafeteria additions, addressing the security and safety issues that have been identified on all 3 of those sites by providing secured entries and by going through a redesign of the pickup and drop off at each of those 3 sites. But I will say that, with buildings that are 53 to 68 years old, depending on which ones we're talking about, there are some challenges that come along with that. Somebody earlier mentioned the aging infrastructure. I guess that was James. He'd said, that there's aging infrastructure in the district, and the elementaries is really where that's at, right? So, when we go through the process of renovating and adding on to these, yes, we address many of the needs, but things like natural light or adjacencies of educational spaces, energy efficiency, those items are really hard for us to address in this scenario. And then as you go down into the other areas of the district, middle school, high school, and other district-wide facilities like the administration building, transportation and maintenance. We heard you loud and clear in the forum of items that were, that are important to you in those facilities as well. And we've done the best we can to pull all of those elements into each of those buildings. So the middle school, it's very similar through each of these 3 scenarios. What we'd be doing at the middle school, it would be a refresh of classroom spaces. So what we mean by that is, when you walk into the classroom, you would see new paint, new flooring, new finishes, maybe new millwork, cabinetry and such. It's been a really hot topic in our discussions throughout the community that the pickup and drop off is just not safe at the middle school. It's a real challenge. So we have that in all 3 scenarios here of a redesign and a pretty major overhaul of how that site pickup and drop off scenario would work. Secured entry at this building as well. And then a science edition, and I recall seeing questions about this of, why a science edition? Well, it's that the science rooms don't have lab space per se right now. So the science edition would be, provide lab space, and it would allow us then to repurpose the rooms that are used for science and maybe pull in some elements like natural light and such through those spaces. And then infrastructure, things like HVAC issues, with temperature control and such, or roofing issues, things of that sort. And last but not least, you see we added here in scenario 2 some food service upgrades and new lockers. At the high school, very similar to middle school, refresh of the space. So that's finishes, that's millwork, cabinetry and such, secured entry. And then the infrastructure issues that have come up in our discussions. So again, that's things like roofing and HVAC, temperature control type of issues. District-wide, we have included in these scenarios new furniture and technology throughout. So that doesn't mean a wholesale replacement of everything, but it is a pretty significant investment in providing you new where it's appropriate and upgrading technology where it's appropriate throughout the district, as well as new district communication system that's really needed here for safety reasons within the Allegan Public Schools. And the last bullet is performing arts, lighting and sound upgrades. So you have a beautiful performing arts center, but the lighting and the sound systems are dated, and those are in fact in need of updates. So that is carried through all three scenarios. The track at the high school there, the track surface is wearing out. That's beyond its useful life. So we've included in all three scenarios a new track surface. Tennis courts, we've heard you loud and clear on that. It's replacement of all tennis courts, providing you with brand new tennis court complex. And then a couple things added here in scenario 2 that do not carry through the other scenarios are some improvements to the pool that would look like temperature control, HVAC type of stuff, as well as some seating that was brought up, and then refreshing the high school locker rooms. And also there's been some consideration given to athletics here specific to the football stadiums. So synthetic turf is a consideration in scenario number 2. When we get down to the scenario 3 and 4, you'll see that those elements I just mentioned drop off. So what is alike in these 3 scenarios is that the bulk of what I just mentioned for middle school, high school, and these district-wide furniture, technology needs, performing arts center, all of that carries through all 3 scenarios: tennis courts, new track surface. But what doesn't carry through is synthetic turf at the high school, or the work in the pool area, or the high school locker rooms. And that was a direct response to what we saw in the survey results that Chloe went through for us, where athletics didn't get quite as much support from the community as the educational needs. So as we had to prioritize to make sure we fit within this $0 million increase budget, some of those type of elements dropped off in scenario 3 and 4. And that's because we have looked at kind of the next level, I'll call it, of investment into the elementary needs. So scenario 3 is a first step towards a grade center scenario. And this is utilizing your existing building stock, but only 2 of your buildings. So Pine Trails and Westward operating as a K through 2 and a 3 through 5 set of buildings. And then Dawson would come offline. So Dawson would either be repurposed or potentially even demoed and turned into a greenfield site. We would work on a solution to that together. This provides a little more for at the elementary level. It responds to more of the needs that were brought up because it allows us to do a heavier renovation and more significant additions to these sites, providing new, introducing new elements to the site that would address some of what would be a challenge for us to get kind of all the way there with it, say in scenario 2. So we'd still be addressing the safety security issues, but we'd be providing a more modern learning environment, maybe is the best way to put it, in scenario 3. And when Sean shows you the diagrams, it'll make a little more sense to you as to the specific difference between scenario 2 and 3. So this is going partway there. And, while I see some real benefits of this scenario, I gotta say I am a little concerned about how intrusive this is on each of these 2 sites. And what I mean by that is that thinking about the construction process, we would have to phase this in a way where we're coexisting with the students and faculty. And that's always in the forefront of my mind when we're planning how we're going to build a project, is how do we do this in a way where we're least impactful to your district, so that every student at every grade level is getting the education that they deserve, and that construction is not a burden to them. And we'll be able to do that here, but it's going to be challenging. It's going to cause us to have a longer duration, and longer duration and more phasing equates to it being a little more costly. So that led us to considering, what if we did a grade center on a brand new site? What would that look like? So that's scenario 4, and somebody already asked that question of where it would be, and James did a good job of addressing that. So the site is to be determined. But this lets us address all of the needs, coming really all the way there with what the community had asked us for in regard to elementary schools, to give you that modern learning facility, addressing things like natural light, safety, security, 21st century learning environments. It gives the chance to have kind of a blank canvas and create this grade center on a new site in the way that the community would envision it, along with all of the other elements that I'd already mentioned, in scenario 3 for the other facilities in the district. One challenge with this that we recognize and we will not ignore is, what do we do with the existing building stock? So that is certainly a consideration that we will work through together. We've included cost in these budgets for all 3 of those sites, Westward, Pine Trails, and Dawson, to at worst case scenario, take those down to provide a greenfield site. But that's not the end game. That's not the ultimate plan, is to just say we're going to take those down. I just want the community to know that we're committed to not abandoning a building, and leaving you with an eyesore in any of these neighborhoods. And the ultimate goal would be to repurpose those. The nice thing about this scenario from the construction standpoint, here I go again, putting my construction hat back on, because that's me. That's my part of this gig here. But we're fully separated, right? So that's one of the nice things about this scenario, is it allows us to separate construction at elementary schools completely from your daily operations. And you can see off to the right-hand side the cost ranges that we've assigned to each of these, and we'd be happy to answer questions about that as we continue through. I think I'll pause there. The next step would be for Sean to go into walking through the blocking diagrams for each of these. But if anybody else wants to chime in, James or Sean, or if there's questions in the chat, maybe we pause now and address those.
James, would you like to talk about the 2 questions that are in the chat?
Yes. What are those? Or I can pull them up, or you can tell me what they are.
All right. So Julie was wondering, if this project were to move forward, how many years out are we thinking before the school would be open?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll start, and then maybe we'll let Jacob help as well. This came up in the survey a couple of times too, of students that were disrupted from the reconfiguration process, and maybe not wanting to disrupt them again. And so I think it's a great question. But in our discussions, we don't think kids would walk into this building until the fall of 24. And again, I'll let Jacob chime in a little bit, but that would allow quite a few grade levels to kind of get through into the middle school and not have to go through that second disruption or shift. Is that accurate, Jacob?
Yeah, James, that is accurate. I would say for the new grade center, if we're speaking specific to scenario 4, that is accurate. And I might add that with scenario 3 and potentially scenario 2, we would be looking at several sequential summers of renovation is the way that would be approached. So drawing the comparison between scenarios in terms of schedule, I would anticipate that scenarios 2 and 3 would go beyond 24 because of the amount of work that we'd be looking to accomplish in these sequential summers, in taking a break during the school year in large part to not interrupt your operations. Although we would do everything we could during the school year, we would not be able to do everything we would like. So that would cause those scenarios to stretch out further than a new construction scenario would.
And the only other question we have right now that may be addressed in a little bit was Tammy asked, with the bond, would young fives and early childhood special education join this potential K-5 building, or would there be some extra money to go towards the list of improvements that are needed at Northward and the Early Childhood Center?
Yeah, another excellent question. We really love the energy at the Early Childhood Center. To have preschool, young fives, childcare on that site, I think has been an enormous benefit to our community. And we feel really good about that. And so the plan would be for that to continue. And I do think, and again, we can let some others chime in, that some of the needs structurally or just, that classroom needs, there were some facilities assessment needs identified at Northward that we would be able to accomplish. Is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely, James.
Yeah. So good question, Tammy.
I think we can move on.
All right. Thanks, Jacob. So just kind of jumping into just a few what if scenarios. We had, as we talked in some of the previous community forums, we had the opportunity early on to really meet with a group of stakeholders and talk about what the future of elementary education looks like. And as we did that, Jacob's described some of the amenities that were suggested to start to move the bar a little bit further on the elementary environment. So in this scenario too, we're going to address Westward, Pine Trails, and Dawson. We're going to show you a few different ideas, and these by all means are not final design solutions, but they are ways in which we start to really see if we are addressing those issues that have been brought up. So in the case of all of the options that you're going to see for scenario 2, we've explored the idea of adding a gymnasium to each building. And the idea behind that is to really start to create a separate environment for the cafeteria and the gymnasium so that programming can be much more flexible and those spaces can be much more available. As many of you know, the middle of the day, that gymnasium is tied up for food service use. So that's one way in which some of the programming can be expanded at the buildings. Another thing that we looked at is just the institution of adding classrooms that would address some of the specialty needs such as music and art, really giving them dedicated space. And then the third key goal that looks like there's a ton of community support for when we asked that question in Community Forum 2 or Survey 2, and that is for academic support space. And when we say academic support space, there are so many specialists that are in the buildings that are providing many support structures for students these days. It could be social work, it could be speech. There's a whole range of the different supports that come into the building. The vintage of all of the elementary buildings that you have, those were not at the forefront of education at that time. It was classrooms, and that was mainly it. So the buildings really aren't set up to provide office spaces, one-on-one spaces, small group spaces for those types of activities to really boost the educational quality of the students. So those three things are all common themes that you'll see here in scenario 2 that we work to add to all three buildings. Again, I want to reiterate that scenario 2 is really keeping the existing neighborhood schools, the existing K-5 configuration that James talked about early on. So in this scenario, this is Westward. Vernon is to the bottom of the page. Academy is to the top of the page. What we looked at here was an idea of adding a gymnasium to the north side of the building. Again, trying to free up the existing space so that it could really become more dedicated as a cafeteria. We know that pickup and drop off at these sites is a challenge across every site. So here what we're suggesting is that rather than have everybody access and discharge from Vernon Street as it is today, what if we did a little bit more separation and created a bus loop that was down to the southeast corner that also could become a service access point? And you'll notice that we're suggesting a flip of the kitchen and servery here to flip to that other side, the east side of the building. That allows us then to place a main office on the west side of the building and really use the west side parking lot as the main parent drop off. And you'll see in the diagram, anything that's represented by the yellow dashed line would represent the parent drop off process. So potentially bringing people in off of Vernon, discharging some of those folks back out to Vernon, or looking at the idea of creating a secondary exit out to Academy, all with the intent of trying to disperse traffic, improve safety on the site, and really make the experience, for parents much easier than I think what people are feeling right now. If we move to the next sketch. So the next sketch is showing a potential for pine trails. Again, very similar goals with this scenario 2 sketch, and that is you see a significant addition to the west side of the building. Within that addition, potentially adding a main office, the specialty classrooms for music and art, and a gymnasium. In this case, we know that there's really the only one way in, one way out approach to accessing this site. So here we've explored a little bit further, and we know there's a lot of site area to the south that we could start to investigate some ideas of bringing people in further to the south onto the site and then discharging them, at least the parent drop-off component, back out to Williams Bridge Road at the current location. Another thought trying to separate those traffic flows that we've looked at is to bring the bus loop in from the north, and there are a few different options that we could explore in this scenario. One is to seek some property that may lead directly out to M89, or we also know that there are still some options to access and discharge for the buses to the north and then to the west out to Williams Bridge Road. Again, that's putting a lot of burden back on Williams Bridge Road, but there is more distinct separation and distance provided between those two traffic flows, which again is going to be an improvement for site safety. The academic support spaces that are shown on this sketch are repurposing the existing office as we looked at this idea of pushing a new main office out into the addition to really have a good point of supervision over the parent drop-off. So the third sketch is Dawson, and we had to flip this one on the page a little bit because Dawson is a very interesting site, very long and skinny. The proportions of it really make it a challenge to add on to. Again, though, what we're suggesting here is the gymnasium that we're showing would actually tear out the existing gymnasium cafeteria space to add this new gymnasium. We're proposing a new cafeteria and then a new kitchen and servery that would happen to the north end of the cafeteria. That would still allow for service access to come around from the north and then to the back side of the building. We're showing visitor parking, and the parent drop-off loop could remain in its current location, and then potentially putting a new bus loop further to the north, along with the staff parking component there. When we start to look at some of the additions that I just mentioned, the gym, the cafeteria, and the kitchen servery, we're showing that as that addition goes on, it would impact classroom space. So what you're also seeing on this sketch is a suggested addition to the southwest corner of the building, or to the bottom right of the plan that you're seeing on the page. This would provide for 2 new classrooms to offset the loss of some of those classrooms that could be impacted by the addition for the cafeteria and gym. And then also within this southwest addition, we are showing a new art and music room. And then the 2 lighter gray spaces are repurposing current classrooms to start to sprinkle about the academic support spaces that we mentioned earlier. Discharge and access to this site are really difficult, as many of you know. So another thought that came to mind was, is there the potential to seek another point of exit to the far north end of the site, and again, try to get some further dispersion of traffic coming out of the site. It's still not perfect on this site. Everything really just kind of pushes back to Elm Street and makes it quite a challenge. I think you probably also notice in this sketch that as we continue to think about ideas of adding these elements onto the building, it puts more and more pressure on the overall site, and the amount of playground area starts to become decreased. I think out of all of the options in all of the sites, this has been probably the most challenging as we've been thinking about it as a group. So we've started a list, and we wanted to run through some of these. I've highlighted a few of these things as I've went through some of my sketches. Jacob's highlighted a few of these as he's talked a little bit about some of the amenities that we provided within each scenario. As we think about it, this solution certainly utilized the existing assets of the district. Maintaining neighborhood schools, as James mentioned, that's one of the questions that we really want to understand tonight is, where are the priorities? Is it keeping the neighborhood schools? Is it supporting some of these other educational possibilities that are out there? That's the key question that we really want to understand tonight. Facilities assessment items, as Jacob mentioned, you're certainly able to accomplish more because the investment at the elementary schools is lower in this scenario. Some of the cons, I guess it depends on where you weigh in on the educational approach. In some eyes, the K-5 instructional model could be a downfall to a scenario such as this. James talked about the legacy issues, or more about, I guess, some of the community issues. This still kind of maintains everybody in their current silos at each of the elementaries. So this doesn't move the needle on some of the issues that we know the district has tried to continue to resolve over time related to creating a larger sense of community. Multiple sites, we talked early on about the need for staff to move between multiple buildings. And so this still keeps that challenge in place. And then Jacob's already hit on some of the construction schedule. So I think as we were going through these, we thought this would be a good point in time to pause and allow for any of you, as you see this information and react to this information, to offer up any additional pros and cons that you see in this scenario too.
We don't have any comments coming in yet, but we can wait a little bit as well.
If something comes up, Rob, we can always backtrack if we need to, so just let us know. So scenario 3, this is a much more significant move at 2 of the sites, and the 2 sites that we've identified for this scenario are Pine Trails, which you're seeing on the screen, and Westward. Again, I think you saw in this scenario 2, the site study for Dawson really doesn't lend itself to adding significant additions to that site without really taking it to a point where it's a non-functional site. So what we looked at is, when we went through that visioning process and thought about grade center configuration, what we really were looking to do is create a building program that fostered collaboration within the facility between the different grade level teachers. Along with that, really grouping each of those grade levels together. So what you're seeing here are significant classroom additions. Now, we don't have all of the detail identified in these sketches. It's more just to show you roughly what the approximate size of additions that we would need to accomplish some of these goals would be. But in this case, we're showing a new kindergarten and first classroom wing addition to the southwest corner of the existing building. Within that same portion of an addition, we're identifying a new main office, a new lobby space that really would create a new front door that faces south on the site rather than the current front door that faces west. And then adding another addition up to the northwest corner of the existing building, and that could be a second classroom wing that would provide space for the second grade classrooms. Within this, we're also suggesting that there's a lot of repurposing of this existing building footprint. Within the existing space, we would create dedicated classroom space for art and music. Academic support space would get sprinkled around adjacent to the classroom wings where that staff is most needed, and where that staff has the greatest impact and interaction with students. Another thought that we had is taking one of the pods and really creating that as more of the food service pod. So you would have a new cafeteria to the north side of the diagram, and then repurposing some of that existing space for a kitchen and servery, allowing the current gymnasium cafeteria to really be utilized mainly as a gymnasium. Similar ideas on the site as far as bringing parents in from the south, potentially discharging them out to the west, as well as maybe exploring a secondary exit to the south. And then similar idea for bus and service access coming from the northwest corner of the site. Again, just trying to create those separate traffic flows. In this diagram, we are suggesting that there could be a connection between the the parent loop and the bus loop, but that would only be open potentially during the off hours or the after school hours when there might be larger event and you would need to have multiple egress points off the site for dispersal of those vehicles and also for additional parking amenities when you have larger crowds at the school. So that's, you can certainly see that in both of these options, the amount of addition is much more significant than what you saw in scenario 2. So kindergarten through first at Pine Trails, and we'll move to Westward now and show you what that might look like as a 3rd through 5th grade building. Many similar ideas as far as the site. You'll see that the parent access and the parent discharge to Academy as an idea is still in play here, showing a bus loop and service access coming from the southwest corner, and then really packaging one large addition that could go to the north edge of the existing building. Part of that would be a new gymnasium, and then the remainder would be classroom wing. And that classroom wing we're suggesting could be a 2-story building. That way we can preserve more site area in this scenario. We're not allowed to do a 2-story building when it involves kindergarten and first graders, unless we make sure that all of the spaces that they access are located on a main floor. But when we get to some of the upper elementary grade levels, we certainly can explore an idea like this. You'll see repurposing of the existing space, main office space in what now is classroom space. And then again, a new kitchen and servery. I think that was another thing that I'm not sure if we've touched on much tonight, but in our elementary visioning, the kitchen and the food service process and delivery at the elementaries is a pretty strong goal that people felt really needed to be advanced, really increase the offerings, much fresher offerings, and trying to really take those to the next level at each of the elementary sites. So again, this is suggesting that Pine Trails and Westward would be kept in the scenario 2. The future of Dawson, I think, is something that would need to be considered in this option. So again, some more pros and cons. Utilizing the existing building assets. This is the move to that grade center model that James helped us understand better earlier. I think, one of the cons that could be identified here is that the logistic challenges for parents. There's still, if you have a early L and an upper L student, there still are potentials where you're visiting multiple sites to drop a student off or drop students off. Ancillary and teaching staff potentially still in that same boat by having two separate sites here to move between. Jacob's touched on some of the other things regarding the cost and the construction schedule. And I've already mentioned the Dawson, what the future for Dawson might hold. Certainly the goal is to not leave that as an eyesore, as Jacob mentioned. Transportation costs, I think Amy and James have started to do a little bit of analysis, and they feel that in a scenario like this, it might add some transportation costs. So I guess, Rob, with that, we'll pause again, see if there are any questions related to scenario 3 or even scenario 2 if we need to back up for a minute.
We just had a comment in the YouTube chat where Rhonda said that their Pine Trails definitely could use a bigger parking lot for events. Also a question from Russ. Has a district looked at a K4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 setup?
No, we didn't explore that option. And again, if we did early on, somebody remind me. But we didn't explore a reconfiguration of that nature. And it would take some thought on my part and our part to kind of pro and con that kind of idea. I can see why it would be I can see why it would have some benefits. And it's really intriguing, but I would say at this point, that is not one of the scenarios that we explored to build this today.
Also, Dennis was wondering how much of scenario 3 requires additional land purchases or negotiations?
So I think some of that's still to be determined, but I guess in the case of Pine Trails, seeking an exit to the north, there is a potential that we wouldn't need to if we exited from the north and then west out to Williams Bridge Road. If we did seek an opportunity to go to M89, that would involve some land acquisition potentially. Also, to get an inward point from further to the south would certainly involve some conversation about some potentials there. At Westward, the options that we showed, Westward, all could happen on the existing site. And then in scenario 2, when we talked about Dawson, there would certainly have to be some sort of negotiation with the fairgrounds to understand if there could be a possibility to work an exit out to the north off of the Dawson site.
Julie brings up a concern that students who walk currently use the fair driveway to avoid traffic, as there are no sidewalks on Tamarack or Arnold, and sending traffic here would create a need for more sidewalks.
All right, so scenario 4, just the idea of a new building. This is, again, a little bit more diagrammatic in nature, trying to give you a general sense of some of the basic core concepts that have been brought up in many of our visioning conversations. To begin with, I know there's been a lot of concern about what if we can combine all of the K through 5 kids into one building. What does that look like? Does it feel like just one big mega school, or are there ways we can really start to break down the size of community within that overall facility? So we've heard that, and what we've worked at here in this diagram, again, this is just a what if. Certainly a lot more design, but something that just helps us get our head wrapped around what some of these ideas look like. But this is showing that while it's one larger building, you sort of build a school within a school type mentality. So anything identified with the orange to the left side of the screen, those would be earmarked for the early elementary kids, so grades K through 2. Anything in the light gray off to the right side of the plan would be 3rd through 5th grade. And another big comment was, how do we maintain at least some identity for each of those grade levels? So we're showing 2 separate drop-off loops. There would be a drop-off loop that would bring parents up to the main entry of the left side of the plan, and then a secondary drop-off loop that would bring to the later elementary component. The right are each organized by grade level. So, as James talked about some of the benefits, the collaborative nature of a plan like this really could support all of those potentials that he had mentioned. Academic support space being located kind of at the hub of each of those wings, so that staff is easily accessible by all grade levels. Dedicated space for art and music. You'll see to the top side of the plan, bus loop. So you could consider one single bus loop. And so whether you're an early elementary or a later elementary student, you're arriving at the building and just heading into your appropriate door from that drop-off point. Everything to the right side of the plan is pretty much a carbon copy and mirror image of what we just described on the left side. One thing that is of note here are there's some other efficiencies that could be built into a model such as this. The first being food service. There could be one central kitchen that serves 2 separate cafeterias, and the kitchen is oftentimes a very expensive element that in 2 separate buildings, it could be consolidated and you could really see some efficiencies there. Another potential benefit is a central mechanical plant. So energy efficiency is certainly something that we want to consider in any project that we do, but having one central mechanical plant could offer up some savings there from a operational as well as even a first cost of the size of space that we need to build. The gymnasiums, you'll notice, they are back to back. So again, each grade level configuration would have their own gymnasium, but there could be an option here where we put a partition between the 2, and that becomes one large venue that either side could use. It could be another amenity that the district just has available for larger group gatherings that is out there. So I think this starts to give you some idea. Again, this isn't certainly a final design solution, but it certainly has the bones of supporting many of the goals that James described early on with the grade center configurations. So coming back to pros and cons for this, I think I've touched on most of the pros. The district unity, I think that's one again to come back to, that all students are coming and really building their academic careers from day one together and moving all the way through high school together. A lot of operational efficiencies that could be realized in something like this. And then some of the cons that are in play are just that the future, what does the future hold for any of those sites that the buildings no longer would be in use? Again, what's your perspective on the loss of neighborhood schools, and is that a con? So any additional pros and cons or that people can think of, or any other comments related to these scenarios?
I was looking for a little clarification on this, but Brian in the YouTube chat, he just wondered if there are any plans for a computer lab or technology classroom in regard to the building in scenario 4. Yes, actually, some of the visioning exercise that we went to, a computer lab and a STEM type of space was also discussed. So that kind of falls into some of this central area, or some of the academic support spaces or adjacent to the art and music room.
There's certainly, it's built into the overall size. That we just didn't specifically identify them in this plan, but I think in future plans that we share with the community, we certainly could add those spaces to show that they are included in a plan.
And James had touched on this earlier, I believe, but is there a proposed site for scenario 4? That's a question from Dennis.
Yeah, we can touch on that again. And, you know, we wanted to get through this forum as we've been trying to design a program that we feel the community can support. We started really broadly, and then each survey and each forum and each meeting is a narrowing of our focus. And, you know, as we've asked the community if this particular option is something they would support, thus far, there has been a lot of support. But we wanted to make sure that we took that to a deeper level in this conversation to try to determine if indeed that support is there. And that'll be involving the survey afterward as well. And so that would lead us to the next steps, which would be, you know, getting a little bit of a deeper dive into what might be available for us. So we're willing to explore some other sites. We do have some property at Pine, as we discussed, but some of the pressures on the entrance and exit would be a factor there to consider. We all are aware that there's property behind the middle school that would provide a pretty nice location for something like this, that would also have some adjacencies to the middle school and the field house, and a quick ability to maybe go to the auditorium even. So there's some ideas there that we've just preliminarily discussed, but to be clear, just didn't want to take that so far without knowing that the community is supportive of a change of this nature.
And then another question, what would the enrollment of a new K-5 building look like based on today's enrollment numbers? That's from Russ.
Yep, good question, Russ. We're at about 900 students now, K-5. So, you know, imagining each building would have, you know, 450 students or so, which Pine Trails actually has the capacity of right now. To give some people some perspective in the community of, you know, have we ever had that many kids in an elementary before? And we have back when Pine Trails was full. So might give a sense of what that feels like. The middle school's been, you know, upwards of between 600 and 700. They're less right now. And again, then to imagine that at a smaller scale, it is something we've talked about quite a bit, is just the need to not have the building feel so large to some of our youngest kids. And I think Sean did a nice job of describing how conjoining the buildings has some benefits, but providing them the sense of their own building would include that welcoming environment that I think everyone was looking for, to not be overwhelmed by the size.
Dennis was wondering if you could discuss the year-over-year energy efficiency of scenario 4 versus the others. Is there a reduction in ongoing costs?
Yeah, I'll turn that over to the team. There's quite a few operational savings, anywhere from, you know, snow plowing to sharing a kitchen space to some of the HVAC, as we described before. And I know we talked a little bit about lighting, and but I'll turn it over to Sean to address that a little bit.
Okay. From an energy efficiency standpoint, the energy efficiencies would ratchet up significantly from 2 all the way to scenario 4. And the reason for that is we have much greater control, especially in scenario 4, over the design of the building envelope or the outside of the building, and how it helps really preserve a comfortable environment and not waste a lot of energy through that envelope. In scenario 2, all of the new additions, we certainly could design with that same thought in mind, but it only impacts a small component of that plan, and you're still left with a building that, like Jacob mentioned, is, you know, 50 plus years old, And so we know that the existing building walls in many of those scenarios are not designed even close to meet current energy codes. Scenario 3 moves in a much better direction for energy efficiency, just because the sheer amount of new addition that we have in that plan is much greater than 2, but not quite to the degree that we have here in scenario 4. Rob, can you mention a few of the other questions that were embodied in that?
Yes. One of the questions, if there are 900 K-5 students now, what is the occupancy plan for the new building to allow future growth? That one was from Julie.
Sean, were you, sorry to chime in here and cut you off, but before we go to that one, it seemed like you might have been looking for more clarification on Russ's question for energy efficiency. And Sean did a nice job of addressing the energy efficiency side of things, but there's also the operations and maintenance costs that comes along with that. And I think it's really important to touch on the maintenance cost side of things. With these buildings being 53 to 68 years old, that is the point that a lot of the infrastructure is certainly at the end of its useful life. So it's just a reality. It's not to tip my hand in one direction for one scenario or the other. It's just a fact that things get to their end of their useful life. So we always, we get to a point where we weigh the cost of remodeling and additions against new construction, and there's that tipping point where you got to ask yourself, does it make more sense for new construction because you're continuing on with the old bones, the old infrastructure? And examples of things that I'm thinking of are cast iron pipe. A cast iron pipe has about a 50-year life expectancy. So that tells you that there's opportunity for failure that could be costly to the district from that maintenance standpoint, to go along with the energy efficiency points that Sean made.
Just to kind of add to that, Jacob, Heather shares in the chat. She says, it seems like scenario 4 has more pros and cons at this time. And to be honest, when you add in the construction onto the old buildings, like in the past, typically it creates leaking issues from the roof.
Robert, have there been some other things entered in the chat that would be a good time to talk about them? I don't think I caught them all.
So let's see, talking about scenario 4, would that building fit on the property behind the middle school?
Yes, that property behind the middle school, I think, is approximately 90 acres. And if I recall, a scenario of this kind maybe would be 35, 40 acres. Just remind me, Jacob.
Yeah, it's 35 acres is what we planned for it. And that plan would allow for some, certain amount of future expansion as well.
And then to go back to the question before, would the new building allow future growth?
Another good question. Sean, do you have something for that? Because we can go through a little bit, but I guess I'll let you start.
Yeah, I think that the goal with specifically the scenario 4 would be to plan it appropriately so that future additions are easily done to the building. We know right now a lot of the configurations and shapes of the existing building certainly cause some challenges. The site causes a challenge. So I think that's part of what we're really given when we start thinking about the potential for a new site is how do we best place the building on the site, knowing that right now what you see on the screen is just kind of a fictitious diagram more than it is any real response to a site. But when we understand where the actual site would be, this idea that's embodied in this floor plan would morph and transform to allow for all of the different traffic flows, but is also consider how we add onto it.
Yeah, and to take that a little bit further.
Please know that, that is something.
Sorry, Sean. I wanted to give Sean an opportunity to finish his thought, but to think about it in terms of student numbers, if you think about K-5 equaling, 6 grade levels, and it would be wonderful if one day we were back to eight sections per grade level. I will tell you right now, there's nothing of that size in the pipeline, but that would equal, 48 sections times hypothetically, 25 kids per class. That number equals 1,200 students. And so I'm not saying we need to necessarily build these that big, and I guess we can talk about that. But in the event that we were preparing to be, maybe what we once were with 8 sections per grade, and I'll tell you right now, again, that's not where we are, K-5 currently. That could accommodate 1,200 students. So we could even, dial that back a little bit and still be well prepared to grow, even within this existing structure, to just build on what Sean said earlier.
Nancy was wondering if the building were to go up behind the middle school, would this mean taking down the field house? No, good question. We wouldn't want to do that. I think it's worth a conversation at some point if people get excited behind this, how we build connections between this facility being deeper within the property to spare the field house, but also maybe provide connections, whether that be walking connections or trails or pathways in such a way that these kids could still access that facility if needed. So we just haven't gotten to that level of detail in design. Again, for the same reason we've talked about, which is we want to make sure, people are there before we start, getting very excited about the possibilities. So that's to come in the future. Brian asks about computer and technology labs, and I think we've touched on that one already. And then I didn't know, because I didn't hear any response, I didn't know if you saw Heather's comment. Maybe give that to us again, just to be sure. Absolutely. She just said that it seems like scenario 4 has more pros than cons at this time. And to be honest, when you add in the construction cost on the old buildings, it just seems to make more sense.
Yes, that's true. I think that Heather's hit on a lot of the points from tonight. But again, we don't want to be presumptuous. We said from the beginning we wanted to build this together. But the reason we're bringing this scenario to you is because while building it together, this scenario has been favorable on the surveys that it's something we should explore deeper. And so we did that, and we brought that here today to show you a little more depth of thought around that. And the survey results, and maybe this discussion in company with the survey results, will inform us of whether the data supports that, the community is behind something of this scope, because it does have a lot of pros that's not deniable.
Looks like that's it for the comments right now. Oh, one more just came in. Is there a breakdown of the 83 to 84 million so we can see where the money will be spent? That was from Russ.
Maybe, yeah, Jacob, I was going to hand it off to you.
Yeah, thank you, James. So, Russ, we don't have the breakdown prepared in this slideshow, but I can absolutely work with James and company to show more detail, and I can speak to the group about the general breakdown of if you're speaking. I assume you're speaking specifically to scenario 4 with the numbers you referenced in the new construction. part of that budget. It's $54 to $56 million worth of new construction plan there. And then the balance of that is spread out throughout the other facilities that I had mentioned in the beginning of this presentation. $13 to $14 million of investment at the middle school, 9 to 10 at the high school. And then smaller investments as you go through each of the other facilities that I won't go into all that detail, but there's a certain amount allocated to administration building, to transportation and maintenance, to a really small amount at the field house, a certain amount at the early childhood center. So we are prepared to be transparent with that breakdown. We just don't have it in our slideshow today.
Heather was wondering about the middle school in regard to scenario 4. Since the middle school, she believes, needs a lot of work, how long would it take in order to help out the middle school?
Yeah, again, I'll let maybe Jacob chime in. One of the things that would still need to be worked through is by adding on some science classrooms to the middle school, which again are a very large need. I think those of us have had kids go through, or I currently have a student in the middle school. Science classrooms are just like all the other classrooms. And I think we all know that science has different needs educationally that I think are not really being met right now. So by doing that, there are spaces that become open. And is there a way to make that building feel a little less narrow in the hallways and certainly a little less dark in terms of some of the aesthetics? So in terms of timeline, I don't know if we've gone that far in terms of when that would be completed and which phase that would land in. So I'll certainly offer it up to the team to help with that. But we hear what you're saying, and those needs have been noticed in the facilities assessment and walkthroughs as well.
So James, I'll try to help clarify that. It's a fantastic question, and unfortunately, part of my answer needs to be similar to what we've said about sites and such, is that until we, had some confidence and buy-in from the community to know that there's a support for scenario 4 specifically, we haven't run this all the way down to be able to go through the process of sequencing exactly what would go when. And there's many complexities with this that are not just construction related complexities, but also the funding being available. So this is to generate $84 million at a $0 mil increase. It's a 2 series bond, which means the bonds are sold at 2 different periods of time. So our team would need to study that once we kind of know what our marching orders are for what the community supports and wants us to see us move forward with. We would then have to analyze, does how much money is generated in Series 1 and which aspects of scenario can we do with those funds, and then address the balance within scenario Series 2 of the bond sale. Those are typically staggered, and maybe Amy will chime in if I'm incorrect here, but they're typically staggered by a couple of years. So let's say the bond were to pass in May of 21, then bonds would be sold in 22 for the first series, and that would typically be about a 2-year stagger, where the balance of the funds would be in 24. So it's kind of a long answer to try to explain the complexity to you of how we need to map this out to make sure that whatever we start with in Series 1, we have the funds available to do all of that. As far as the duration, just in a vacuum, the duration for the middle school work that we proposed, I would expect us to do that in 2 sequential summers. So it would take 2 summers to accomplish everything that we had planned. And it's just a matter of how that would time out in terms of bond sales.
Dennis is wondering if you could share the cost of the scenario 2 proposal again, because I guess your speaker window was blocking the price there.
Hopefully this slide shows the whole picture for everybody, that in comparison, scenario 2 is $75 to $76 million. Scenario 3 being 81 to 82 million, and scenario 4 being 83 to 84 million dollars. In scenario 2, I made the point earlier as I went through these that there is less investment in the middle schools in this, and a little bit more within athletics and in the middle school specifically. So some food service at the middle school and new lockers, and then more investment in athletics with things like synthetic turf and some enhancements to the pool and locker rooms at the high school. But it's not pulling in all of the programmatic items that were identified in the elementaries. And hopefully whomever asked that question was on the call at the time when Sean walked through the elementary scenarios to see that they're not apples to apples when you compare scenario 2 to 3 or 4. That's by design to show the community that we've listened to you, and we've tried to give you multiple options.
So far, that appears to be it for comments and questions.
Wonderful. I want to thank everyone so much, because this has been the most interactive of our forums with, I think, some really good questions for thought, and really shows that there's a lot of people out there thinking about this in a deep way. And I'm sorry, another question might have just popped in. And it talks about—
I'll let you take that one, James.
I didn't see it all. Let me open that up. To view the surveys and responses. It's a really good question. Rob, there's a place on our website, or a way to direct people to all of this information, correct?
Not presently, but we can get people there.
Okay, so we're going to publish the website dedicated to having all of this information on it soon, right?
Correct.
Great. So that's a good question. So again, very thankful for everyone. And I want to give a little bit of a background and timeline. You can see, from Community Forum number 1, which was back in September 23rd till today, we've continued to take feedback from every single one, and kind of focus our efforts to provide you a depth of analysis each time we get together. So today was number 3. A survey will get kicked out tomorrow that's much shorter. We need to, again, reassure ourselves of where the support lies. And then we'll be going in front of the Board of Education to review the scope of the project at our November 23rd workshop. And then we'll be formulating what we call going to Treasury to sort of apply for the scope of the bond that we're hoping to bring to the voters in May. So again, thank you. I can't thank you enough for being here. Those of you that will watch later, please watch this in full and then take the survey so you're well educated. And it's an exciting time to be a Tiger. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night.